Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor, Thomas Goss, and I'm actually preparing to go to the United States for a few weeks, and last week I got a last-minute commission by the orchestra that I generally work with as an education composer, Orchestra Wellington, to arrange something for their upcoming Circus Proms concert, which is going to feature live acrobats and circus performers and a bunch of other stuff, all mixed together with certain featured pieces of music. And one of those featured pieces of music is Dance of the Doll by Shostakovich. It's a fairly simple piano work, only about 3 minutes long, and it has lots of repeated sections, and I was told to not overdo things in terms of complexity, but just to make it something that would be, fun for the acrobats to do their routine along to. Now, this is a copyrighted work, but I figure in the interests of this being an educational video that what I'm showing to you right now is fair use, and my orchestra will secure the rights for the performance, so I'm not worried about that either. That's really not my job, that's theirs. So I had about 1 day to arrange this, and that is really the thrust of what I'm showing you today, is that I was able to turn this around with full score and parts in about 8 hours. So some of the monkey work, in this case, copying out this piano score, just to have something I could do some copying and pasting from as source material, and then extracting parts, and making sure that, everything looked really, really nicely for the musicians, and the score was finalized, and also finessing the playback on it so the acrobats could do their routine to the new version. That took maybe 2 or 3 hours altogether. But the actual work of orchestration took only, maybe 4 hours or something like that. So I'm going to go through you step by step through the score that I orchestrated and talk a little bit about the process and the time that I spent and what were the steps that I took. All right, so the first step was scoring this out, as I just said. And there is a link which will take you to a version of this for piano, so you can sort of hear the source. So I will just wait while you do that. You can just click through and then come back to this video. So I'm assuming that you've done that. Now let's take a look at the full score again. And I will play this through for you, just running it on my screen with this screen capture program. And that way you can see the little green playback bar go all the way through, okay? Here we go. So I've shown you the beginning of this process, which was just the piano, and you've gone and heard it for yourself. And I've showed you the end of the process, which is the completed score with a little bit of playback. This is using Note Performer. It's a really nice plugin for, just reviewing your score, and it doesn't eat up a lot of RAM. So I like it a lot, and it's fairly realistic. I've actually had very good feedback from orchestral musicians in terms of, finding it more satisfying to hear that than the Sibelius 38 gigabyte, which I think is actually more like 52 now that they have updated it. Anyway, so rather than the Sibelius native sounds, the Note Performer sounds can, do a passable job, I think. But, good enough for reference, so you can hear what I was going for here. So the question is how to score everything so that you have a nice, satisfying, circus-like arrangement that, has some integrity in terms of being its own orchestration. And there is actually a version of this for orchestra and solo violinist. So the solo violinist takes the melody part and plays it with double stops and all the way through, and with very little changes. And then it's mostly just strings going pa behind it. All right, so I started off in a similar way with the first violins playing the melody because, it's kind of nice to start in a very calm place, I feel. Now, this is the dance of the doll. This is not like the dance of the giant marshmallow, right? So I just want things to be, nice and easy going. Notice that I don't really cause the accompaniment to flex, except for at this point where the melody really soars. I feel that there needs to be a stronger accompaniment, right? And the same thing here. This is like a very important point in the music where, we are going to be leading to the cadence and then, turning around to a new idea, correct? So this is a good place for everybody to inflate the dynamic a little bit. You can see the accompaniment part is just very, very, very basic. Boom chuck with the left hand and single note melody with the right hand. Okay, now here we get a little bit more interesting. Notice how the accompaniment becomes a little simplified. We don't have situations like this, two voice writing or chords or anything. We just have intervals as the support. And we've got harmonic thirds in the accompaniment now. Now, let's back out a little bit and see how I scored this. Now notice that I added to the staccato strings. They're playing alongside horns now, which are scaled back. All of this wind and horn doubling is scaled back dynamically, right? So we've got mezzo forte here, mezzo piano there. And the clarinet coming in to thicken the line of the firsts and seconds, right, leading to these thirds, right? So I'm not saying, okay, well, just first violins, and then the seconds will come in when they start to play these thirds here, right? I am actually having both string groups, both violin groups, play together because I just feel that is a better sound, and it actually is visually better on stage too, and just is much more cohesive within the strings, rather than just to leave this out in the seconds, which might be, just the default way of doing things. So another thing to notice here is that the instrument that is actually faithfully doubling every single thing that the violins do is actually the clarinet, an octave lower for the most part. right? It is basically treating the melody as if it doesn't jump up a sixth, right? So da da bum. So staying down here, right? If we were to isolate it, it would sound like this. Right? So only here does it fall into line with the actual curve of the two violin groups, right? But never fear, the jump upwards is doubled by flutes, right? So you get this really nice, not too thick, but just a very radiant kind of feeling here, right? Just to review what that sounds like. So you can see that it's not overdone, right? But it is preparing the ear for this upcoming place here at the meno. Somebody was asking recently, how do you just indicate a momentary reduction of speed, right? A reduction of tempo. And it was funny. I mean, the first thing that popped into my head was meno, and like people were just not accepting this. This is like one of the most common markings in terms of tempo, just to throw in a bar that is less fast, right? So I could not convince the person I was talking to or the person I was chatting with online that, just say meno, everybody knows what it means, right? The whole point of this is to express what you want to say with as few words as possible, with as few and as recognizable words as possible. Meno does it, just means not as much, right? So not as much tempo. So you're already ritardando into meno, right? And I have, if you look here, I have in grayscale, these are hidden tempo changes that I have stuck in there. I could bring these to the front again. Right? See, as soon as it becomes a visible object, the other system text jumps up because they're sort of colliding over the same exact space. So I will just undo that. So yeah, so this is another way of controlling the playback or finessing it, right? I was pretty much imitating the version that my performers, the acrobats, are practicing along to. They have all of these very exaggerated tempo changes. But I mean, they're good exaggerations. They fit it very well. It's very kind of grandiose, circus acrobat type tempos. So yeah, so that takes us to right here. Pianistically, it's just thirds, right? With some boom chuck chuck triads. Or sevenths here, right? Just different voicings of chords, and with accents and all. So you assume that is going to be forte. Now notice I did not even bother marking the dynamics here in the piano. It just is a waste of time. I know what I want to do, so it just I might put them in a more complex piece, but this is just dead easy. Okay, so. The first thing to do was to score out the violins playing this. I want to stick with that violin tone for a while. Now notice what I did here. I transferred this line in thirds to the violins, but I have the firsts being tracked below at the octave, right? So instead of just, a very, very simple sound like this, we've got this very satisfying octave and a sixth sound. Right? So that is one way that you can deal with things when you want to expand the sound of a line of thirds, right? A harmonized melody like this is to just, have a full octave below the top note and then leave in the thirds, right? You just have a really super huge thing. And I've actually seen arrangements where you just have octaves in the strings and then you have the melody note played or inferred, right? By what's going on in the accompaniment. But this is an easy arrangement, right? Now, notice that we are changing from a single line of pizzicato in the double basses for your boom note to octaves in the lower strings, octaves with a big old zooming type of a tenuto mark. So people have the wrong idea about tenuto marks. Tenuto really just means full, right? And with piano, you can give the full value to the note before you lift your finger, right? Along with maybe some special emphasis. But with the violin, it just means to bow with a very long, very full bow, right? So that is what's going to happen here. So it's just a real zoom, zoom kind of a sound. Just really, just kind of pushes. Think zoom when you see the tenuto mark, right? Because the bow stroke is just very full and very fast with a shorter note. Okay, then I added some clashes here, added some timpani. Now, you'll notice with the timpani that I actually only use 4 pitches in this entire piece, and the timpanist does not need to change, right? So they are low F, then A, then B flat, and then D. And that all fits the span of what you can do with 4 standard timpani. Right, now here we have tuba and bass trombone. Now, I didn't even bother mentioning like what is the instrumentation, just because it sort of seems so obvious. But yeah, doubled winds and 3 horns. And yes, and then just the very lowest of the low brass, the low heavy brass, bass trombone and tuba. Now, I could have actually had more heavy brass, but what's the point? It's just really not needed. Okay, now here is oboe and clarinet. Now, they are replicating what's happening in the strings, right? You've got octave clarinets, and you've got the oboes in thirds, doubling the violins, right? So the viola note is down here at the bottom of this, and then this top note is doubling the oboe just to make that top note very, very thick, right? And this is the sound that you end up getting. Right? And then immediately the clarinet comes in. It's the same dynamic, but I'm marking it again just to make sure that it's very, very clear that I want this to be a solo. Yes, it's mezzo forte, which I generally want people to avoid because it's so much of a blending tone. But notice how I crescendo into just a firm forte right here in the middle. So that is all pretty clear, with the strings dropping back down to, very, very basic accompaniment style that happened before, with staccato middle strings and pizzicato bass. All right. So that is all, what I feel is to be fairly obvious. There are some nice touches in here. I liked throwing in the horns, and that was good. It was good, firm, emphatic, but not too strong. Right? I just want everything to be more or less gentle, even at some of these bigger moments. I don't want it to overdo it. I don't want it to get Wagnerian. Because this piece is really more like has a sort of a Chopin-esque kind of an approach. Or maybe, actually reminds me more of like Tchaikovsky's piano pieces that he wrote that are sort of intermediate level or easy level. He wrote a few sets of piano works that have that kind of sort of more easygoing thing. So I really think that is the spirit in which Shostakovich is writing this. So now we get to something fun, and this is that just very, very slow accelerando up to a faster tempo, right? And it's marked poco a poco crescendo in the original, going from piano to, I think, mezzo forte, and then mezzo forte up to forte, but I take it up to fortissimo here. In the strings. Now, notice once again I've got hidden objects in the score. I've got this hidden crescendo hairpin all the way through, all the different parts. This is not going to be seen when it prints out, by the way. All this grayscale stuff is going to be invisible. And by the way, this is just my playback version of this score, as you can see up here. Dance of the Doll playback. This does not have all my finalized stuff. I added some header titles and some other things, and I might be off on some of these rehearsal marks and so on. But yeah, but this is just the playback version. So yeah, so here we're going to, once again, pizzicato double bass, this time fattened up by timpani, an octave higher for a lot of the pitches, and tuba. Now notice that I throw in some compromises here. E sharp is spelled as F, so that's the same exact pitch. And then the higher D of the timpani rather than the lower D, and so on. And then I get to a certain point where I kind of don't need it anymore because the music is getting emphatic enough, right? But I just want to give it a ping as things start, right? Because I think that this will just give it some, even though things are starting from Mano once again and accelerating, I just think that the sound of the timpani gives it a very circusy feel. Okay, so here we've got pizzicato on this chuck chuck type of accompaniment, and it is an octave higher than scored, right? That way I can give this line doubled to violas and cellos, which I think make a good team on this. All right, and I do not need any doubling on that from winds or brass or anything. And above our little pizzicato here, even an octave higher, I have some nice glistening little flutes. And notice that I don't just go boop, 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 but I go boop, 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 right? Which I think just gives it a little bit more life. And then here, the triangle is going ting. Now notice it's not going ting on the chuck chuck part. It is going ting at the beginning, and then its resonance glows or glitters throughout the rest of each bar, right? And it also is a very circusy thing. It helps to almost solo this, right? It's almost a triangle solo in a sense. All right, and so I think that makes for a pretty cool little effect. Let's have a listen to it again. Now that is one of the things about, I've noticed just in terms of the playback engine with Sibelius and the sounds that are offered from different sound sets, is that the triangle just is almost never really has that convincing sound. When I hear a triangle part from an actual triangle, it just has so much more life to it, and there's so much more complexity. So, yeah, sorry that wasn't that audible there, but I don't want to mess with my mixer settings. All right, so notice that here we cross over, and it is the same here. It's the same exact pitches, right? So we have to change roles, right? The chuck chuck has got to drop back down to its scored pitches, to its scored register, and then it can rise through the violins, and it's pretty much scored as it is. Notice I make compromises here. Like here we've got this A sharp fifth without any harmonization on the eighth note that follows, right? So I just let that be the way that it is in the strings, right? That just is what it will sound like on the piano anyway, right? And this is all kind of done exactly the same. Just compromising for what was scored by Shostakovich. Okay, and then I threw in this little cool trillo here, which I feel is a nice, effective way of dealing with it. Ba-da-dee-dee-ba-da-dee-dee. Yeah, I just really like that. Okay, and to back out here a little bit. You should be really watching this full screen on a nice big screen. Big screens are pretty prevalent nowadays. They're pretty cheap. And you should be doing a lot of your work on this if you're a professional orchestrator. I just recently got a 4K screen, which was really cheap actually. It's it was actually almost obsolete. It was an old model they just wanted to get rid of, which is just the way I shop. So yeah, so oboes are doubling these thirds played in the violins, and then I keep up the little chuck chuck 2 octaves higher than previous, right? So we've got the doubling here for this, right? It's all working together. Okay, and I'm not even bothering to have the strings play this chuck chuck accompaniment at all, right? They're just playing pizzicato and hitting, the root of each boom. And here we go. Things get stronger once again, and I am having the horns take over on the chuck chuck. Now, this is something interesting. In the final score, I dropped the 4th horn, and I gave this little boop boop to A2 bassoons. And then I gave this little 4th part here to the 3rd. And it was just one of these last moment things where the librarian told me, oh, actually it's 3 horns. And then I fixed it back, and then she told me a few hours later, oh, wait, we do have 4 horns. But, it's actually better the way that it worked out, because it just, if this is all that the 4th horn player would have to play for the entire piece, they might as well not even be playing, right? They might as well just get a chance to catch up on, looking at their iPhone and catching up on Facebook or something, right? I'd just as soon not bother them if I can get away with it, especially in a simple arrangement like this. So yeah, clarinets starting to play harmony along with the violas, which are basically playing the same pitch as the top of these thirds. You don't really need to have the violas play in thirds, actually. This is kind of a cheating effect. I could have had the violas playing harmony here, playing 4ths and 3rds. But I just decided, it's why bother? It's going to feel like some strings there in both parts. Check it out. Yeah, see, so it's a situation where, the sound of the strings will just be felt by the ear. So, you don't always have to harmonize when in situations like this with your strings. If the string just grabs the top line over something that is happening in the winds. Okay, so once again, I have got that same exact configuration with of playing an octave apart. See, here we've got these 6ths, right? So seconds on the bottom voice, violas playing the D sharp below that, so that this is a nice firm octave. Right? So it just really has that nice feel. Now, here we go. Once again, we have some big crashing thirds in the piano part, and I can't remember. Yeah, I think this is marked forte, not fortissimo, but it definitely is a fortissimo for the strings and the winds, right? So a really nice way of putting this, right, is to have the flutes A2 playing the top line along with the first violins, and then the seconds are harmonizing below at the 3rd, and that is covered by the oboe, first oboe, doubling that. And then, once again, we've got this whole thing of the dropped octave, right, below that to just really firm up the sound of this, right? Same strategy we used before, but now it's bigger because we have more things to double, and we have a stronger sound that we want there. So, second oboe is playing below at the octave, and then we've got, our chuck chucks on clarinet and horn, and we almost have just like the gymnopédie thing, boom chuck, right, right there. And I feel that is enough, right? It just gives a full sound of strings pushing in the middle there, whereas everything else can just either double that right, as we've got here, or we can just play against it right there. It's effective in both ways. And as to the booms, once again, bass trombone and tuba, doubling the cello and double basses at pizzicato. And notice the staccato marking during the pizzicato, and then tenuto marking during the arco. And we just sort of keep up this strategy. So a lot of different strategies are coming together at the same particular moment. Now, check this out. I'm really happy about this. Just a really obvious gesture. And that is to start the snare drum and just really push into this clashing cymbal right here and these hits on the timpani. Okay? And it is actually not that strong in this particular version. I'll amp it up just one notch and see if that is more audible. Let's hear what that sounds like. It's a way of simulating a roll on cymbal to a clash, right? But you can actually get the much firmer clash of a cymbal pair, and you can get a much more aggressive sound, right? But you have to understand it won't be the whirring sound of the cymbals being rolled. It'll be the kind of the more fuzzy sound of the snare drum being rolled. So, but it's just one way to compromise in that situation where you want to roll a rolled cymbal in a clash. And you can actually have two different players. You could have one rolling the cymbal and the other one just clashing it, but that's kind of overkill, Anyhow, all right, so things cool back down using some of our similar strategies, and we are on to this next little part, and this is all pretty obvious, I think. Descending thirds, it's the same exact pitches, but they're up an octave, right? And then just this little exchange here, an octave higher as well, with first flute and first oboe, just kind of going back and forth. Now here, I want to eventually transition back to the sound of strings, and I also want them to be string octaves, because this is going to be the recap. According to the original piano part, this is where it goes into the little coda, or the sort of, it recaps and then it ends within, I think, 12 bars or something, 14 bars. But here is the point at which the acrobats want to just recap all the way back to the beginning and then start things again. But I don't just want to stick a repeat here. I want it to feel like more developed sounds, even if it's like the music is not thematically developing at all. So, so I'm setting things up here so that the sounds of the winds will bridge over into the sounds of the strings supported by the winds, right? So it's very simple, just adding these little staccato marks here, and then oboes with the bassoons an octave lower, which are doubled by the strings, and it becomes more the winds doubling the strings than the other way around. And then here, we've got, once again, like the reversal of that thing I was talking about with the violas and the clarinets. We've got the flutes playing A2 in this rising line, and the strings playing an octave apart, the violins playing an octave apart. And so that doesn't mean that the bottom will really feel like flutes, but there will be a unified sound here, right? You can get the lower note in either case, right? Whether it's winds being helped out by strings or strings being helped out by winds, you will still get the illusion to the listener, to the unwary listener. Okay, so here we are going to our next little idea, and the whole thing can really be expressed as mainly a string idea with some thickening by the winds, who are doubling various things. The only thing that the winds are doing that is unique is the chuck-chucks, which are going to be played by second clarinet and the bassoons, right? They are going to cover these triads of the left hand. And when the triad just turns into like an interval of a fifth, then I just let the bassoons handle it, because I feel that that's more unified. more unified sound. Just keeping things as subtle as possible and not drawing any attention to the chuck-chucks. I just want them to be automatic. Okay, and then we've got octaves here being played by the strings, which are doubled by A2 flutes and first clarinet. Now, the original idea that I stuck in here was a 1 and 2 and 3 and idea of just the harmony, just kind of like just adding a little bit of impulse there so that it doesn't feel like the same thing. And it also is a bit of an homage to the French ballet orchestrators of the 19th century. They like to keep things very light, while some other cultures, Russians, Germans, and some other composers were just really going for heavy dramatic stuff. A lot of French composers of operatic and ballet music were keeping things very light and kind of very dancey. And of course, that was a form of pop music, really, rather than kind of serious art music. But it's still a way of orchestrating that is valid, and you should learn how to do it. And that's what I did here. And here's what it sounds like. Now, did you notice how the melody comes in, the melody instruments start to add the whole idea of repeating the notes? So it's the strings that hold the value of this melodic, this held melodic note for the longest before coming in, and their partners, their doubling partners, clarinet and A2 flutes, start to do it right away, just jumping in on this, and then the strings come in right at the end. Let's hear that again. All right, and then the third element, the other thing that I'm doing that's original is just adding this little run up in the cellos, which does not need any doubling at all, If I had a third bassoon, maybe that could thicken that up. But it's just totally not needed. This is such a light arrangement here. Even though like everybody is playing in the winds and the strings, but you just still don't need that. I could have doubled this with a horn, but that would just be too forceful. All it needs to be is just the cello. Once again. Right, and that takes us to this part right here. And as you recall, this was originally something done by strings, doubled by oboes. Now I am just completely giving the strings a break here. They are doing accompaniment figures only, and I really like this boop beep boop beep boo boop beep boop boop boo. More of that sort of French style of ballet and light opera. And here we've got the suspended cymbal, which is kind of icky. So I actually just dropped in this whole staff of drum kit and added a ride sound. Right, this is the ride cymbal sound, and I actually have this particular note here. This is for all you Sibelius buffs. I have that note turned off. It says play on pass, right? This is a playback score. So yeah, since I had to make a mock-up of this for the acrobats. So I just want them to feel that this is a very easygoing sound, right? And then, of course, chuck-chucks by staccato middle strings and pizzicato double bass goes the boom, along with staccato bassoons. And see, notice I didn't mark A2 here. I got that in the final version. I took care of all of those little details. All right, and it sounds like this. Now, did you notice this is exactly the same as that other part? And in fact, this is all the same. right? I don't want to overdo it, right? Especially with these big things, I could make everything completely unique all the way through. And the only thing that that would do is just show off what a great orchestrator I am to a bunch of people who are not listening, right? We want this music to be functional. We don't want it to be romantic or exaggerating or anything like that. And this is all the same too. This little, walk down with the clarinets and the solo flutes and everything. So it doesn't get to a place where the music is uniquely orchestrated until here. Here are these last few bars that I mentioned before. That is the original way that the piece ended, but I added this second section to make the piece longer. And here I do double flutes and triangle going ting-ting together, right? And I just feel that that is a nice little touch to add as we're going back to exactly the same arrangement as the beginning, right? So it's just basic strings again. But I want to end on this higher chord here, right? So that is why I'm adding this flute, because I'm anticipating the fact that I'm going to end up with something just a little, with a little kind of upper sound here, just to make it all kind of fall together. And I've got doubling here on the winds. Now you will notice when I do the playback here that the winds really seem to add a lot of weight here, and they will not actually do that live. They will, the winds will be hearing where the music is, and they will blend. If they see pianissimo, they will just slip in right underneath it. So what you're going to hear just now is not exactly right. Now, one last note about that, and that is right here. This is the last bar of the piece, and here's where the double bar goes, but I added this on just to sort of have something that adds on, once again, and really completes things. And I believe in the orchestral version with the solo violin, they had something similar. It was probably just written as one bar, but with a huge fermata over it, right? So, they just really want a nice long ending, and they can adjust that in performance if there's any issue. So here's what that sounds like. So the same thing as the beginning with the little added flute stuff above and triangle. So that is my scoring of this Dance of the Doll piece. And, just to go through all the steps once again, I got the commission the week before. It was on a Friday. And the librarian just emailed me and said, hey, can you do this for us? And, how much would you quote? It was originally something else. And I said, well, I would quote this much for that. And then they consulted with the acrobats, and the acrobats said, no, we want this piece to be scored. And I said, oh, well, in that case, my quote is XYZ. And the manager was right there in the office, and she said, yes, let's do that. So I just said, okay, well, is it okay if I do this after the 1st of the month, after the 1st of August? And they said, oh, that's fine. We actually don't need it until, for a few weeks. But I said, well, then I've got to do it right away because I'm leaving on the 8th of August. So I sat down on a Wednesday here in New Zealand, and 6 a.m, I sat down and I did this piano score to start off with, and I actually just set up my score exactly like this. I think I had the trumpets and the trombones in there because I thought, well, if I get the idea that I want to do them, if I make a judgment about that, I want them to be there. But I ended up just not using them at all. So I set up my score, and I just started in on it. Probably took me maybe about half an hour to score out the piano part, maybe less. Maybe it was more like 20 minutes. I can't remember. And then I just, I just went through it section by section. As I looked at each section And the overall piece, I had a pretty good idea of what I needed to do all the way through, and I just scored it out. So strings, then thickening by the winds on this, and horns, and using just that with just a little bit of clashing and a little bit of timpani, a little bit of lower brass there, and then coming out of it with the clarinet solo. And then I was pretty sure that I wanted this to be very light and, very French, like French ballet, like Sylvia or Coppelia, those two great ballets by Delibes. And then, leading to like a more kind of triumphant, big, crashing, booming section here, and then pulling out of it very, very quickly. And, when I first reviewed the piano score and looked at it in this section right here, I just saw this in my mind, exactly how it would have to go. And then when I considered, after looking over the entire piece and getting ready to score it, I also saw this in my mind. Octave strings, doubled by clarinet and flutes. And then and this is actually something that I came up with on the spot. As I got to that spot, I just said, this is just not, just doing the same exact thing is just not enough. We need something that impels the feeling of the music forward. And I think it will really help the acrobats to just feel where the beat is and to feel, more of the tension. If they are kind of standing on their heads here or walking a wire or doing something else that's tricky, then this will actually help add to the suspense of what's going on, which is what they like. People have this idea that acrobats and tightrope walkers and people like that, they want things to be very calm and everything. And yes, they do need to concentrate on what they're doing, but suspenseful music or music that has a sort of a pulse to it that gets the audience excited, that is actually what they want. That is a tool for them because they feed on the audience response. If the audience is feeling tense about something, if they're feeling anxious, that is exactly what they want. And then this was also something that I thought up on the spot, was these boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, right? That just came through. And I think also just when I got back to here, I hadn't planned this out, but it was just the obvious thing to do, was to have the melody, the harmonized melody here in the flutes, and just to really completely lay off of everybody else. And then to come back in. And then from here on, you can just copy and paste. That's exactly what I did, just to save time and because there was nothing else needed. And then I think I came up with this on the spot as well, just right here, as I was scoring. So, yeah, and this, once again, this whole thing took me about, just in terms of the actual orchestration, putting the notes on the page, and as I went, it was maybe 3 to 4 hours, 5 hours. It's hard to remember, but, I started at 6, and I took about an hour for lunch, and actually, it was more like a half an hour for lunch and an hour for breakfast and getting my son off to school. So with finalizing, editing, and getting the parts prepared and everything else, I guess I was finished at around 3:30. So yeah, so that was 8 hours total just to do this little thing here. And I feel that was working at a pretty fast pace. I could have done it a little faster, I suppose. But, the actual conception of the work and what you want to do with the arrangement actually takes very little time. The act of just putting the notes on the page and working all that out with Sibelius and everything, that is really what is the time-consuming part. If I were to say, like, how much actual time was spent mentally arranging things and knowing where things should go, maybe that was 45 minutes or something like that. It really was not a whole lot of time. And as you can see, it's a very simple piece. This is not an arrangement that I'm bragging about to say, hey, what a hotshot orchestrator I am. This video is just put out there to kind of show you some busy work, right? A score which has a purpose, it's a functional piece that's going to be used in a multimedia show. And, just a fun bit of circus scoring, and I hope that it's a really fun show. If they do any video of it, then I will link it to this, and I'll let everybody know in the community. And thanks very much. This is a really fun lesson to share with you today.